you really get, you have technologies, solution today to really limit everyone to 2 amps. So in order that all the big productive user pharmacies and bakery and so on cannot operate, to force them to work at daytime. But at the same time, someone will say that this is crazy because you have a client, is the more income, but it's not easy to get also financing for long terms. You know, how can you get mobilize 100,000, 200,000, 1 million, you know, with our local banks? So, and in addition to that, very little productive users have access to energy efficient equipment, because you are getting second-hand equipment which is consuming 2-3 times more, because that is cheaper, or their son from Paris or from city sends them all freezer or you know, all welding machines. And so it means you are not only the mini grid operators, you are not only electricity operators, you are a kind of manager of the local economy. You know, you have to, even you're in this business, your business is just not to give a power, your business is really to handle the local economy. And so, because the national utility is very far in Bamako, the grid is far, but villages, they know that power plant is there, it is on their land. So when they have a problem, they all take their motorbike or walk to there. So sometimes, you know, the operator have to run away because, you know, people know where to find him, you know, that, so when he shoot out, you have to run away, otherwise you get in trouble, you know.
So this is a new challenge, is managing expectations, right?
Exactly. That's right.
Everybody thinks you can provide unlimited power, but you cannot.
You cannot do it.
Right? And the problem is that people are tagging on to their connections very inefficient appliances, which consume a lot of power, especially in the evenings. And in the evenings, you have to be super efficient, super lean.
Exactly.
You want to push them into more efficient appliances, but that's the challenge, right? Also, the other challenge is that the financing, the transition, yeah.
Exactly. You know, Joao, it's a good challenge to have if your financing is following, if you really kind of appropriate financing mechanisms, which is there, you know, okay, you made your plan, because any mini grid, in the case of Mali or most of the Sahel country, you build this year, you have to be sure that next year you have to increase the capacity by 30-50%. And then you double the capacity in 5 years, and you triple the capacity in 6-7 years. So that means that investment have to follow. And that sometimes, of course, if you take a country like Mali, since the CEO of Amadere here, and so on, they are doing their best, but we have 11,000 villages. So it means they electrified, you know, they are so huge demand. So you cannot expect that the government will come to one village after giving the power. So it becomes your business to find a way as an operator or developer how you can mobilize resources to develop, because government authority are focused on villages who are not unserved. You know, how they can help. And you, how can you get right financing to keep the capacity growing in your area? So it's a good challenge to have, but today our local financing mechanisms is not adapted to the long-term financing and appropriate financing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Both productive developer and also end users. Yeah, productive users. Yes.
Very good. So we've heard from two mini grid operators here, and they've told us a little bit about the challenges. Now we're going to start teasing out some of the possible solutions. Obviously, it's the beginning of the conversation, and we're going to first get a public sector perspective. Barbara is at the forefront of the mini grids revolution in Nigeria. I know PUE is part and parcel of your offering, and maybe you could tell us more and share more about your activities. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Zilen. I'm the senior advisor to the MD and CEO of the Rural Education Agency. I also head a program called the Solar Power Nigeria program. And the parties represented here are the key parties that play a role in that program, the investors and the developers. So I think I'm actually in the right panel, and I hope I can get them to all sign up to some deal at the end of this session. Basically, the REA has responsibility to electrify unserved and underserved communities. So unserved rural communities, underserved, bit of a hybrid, peri-urban communities. places where they are not getting frequent electricity, and places where they may have a grid, and maybe the solution might be interconnected mini grid. Is this the time we'll watch the video?
Yes, I'm trying to.
Okay. So we'll watch a video, or maybe I could go with this. Which one? Okay, good. So I'll take you through the slides, this one. Good. Okay. Anyway, so before I go into, before it starts working, REA receives funding from the government, right? On one end, it gets government funding, and also it gets donor support in technical advisory, as well as some in-kind support. So it's actually both funded by both the government fully, and also we have a number of programs in partnerships with some donors. So this, maybe you should press it. It's a bit, I told you. All right, so talking about the vision of REA to achieve universal access, affordable and sustainability is a key buzzword for us. One, it must be affordable, and secondly, it must be able to sustain it. Right, like I mentioned, the mandate of the REA promotes rural education in the country, also to coordinate programs within the unserved and underserved space, not just to electrify, but also coordinate the active players within the space. And the third one is to administer the Rural Education Fund, right? So under the REA, we have a fund called the Rural Education Fund. Currently, the fund has two main objectives. One is to provide some sort of capital subsidy, while the other end is also to participate in project by investing in some structure. Next slide, please. Skip that. Okay, good. So going straight to PUEs, and I think just before I start to talk about PUEs, talk about the programs under the REA. We have the capital projects where we pilot a number of initiatives, which I would show. We have the Rural Education Fund, like I mentioned. We have the Nigerian Electrification Project. I'm sure we heard the AFDB representative talk about how there's a program in Nigeria that's successful. So that's the Nigeria Electrification Project under the REA, funded by the World Bank and the AFDB through a credit facility to the government. We also have a program called Solar Power Nigeria program. Like I said, we have the African Mini Grid program. We have a number of programs. I'll just cut it there. So for PUEs, clearly we've realized that mini grids are not viable on its own, right? At the design stage of the mini grid, you need to start thinking about what kind of productive use strategy am I going to deploy? Either you're deploying it directly yourself or with who, right? So we had people just go install mini grids because they had the grant coming from the government, and then 2 years down the line, you realize people are not utilizing the power, and that's because people in the local communities learned how to be efficient to the use of power on their own. You didn't have to teach them that. How? Imagine. So they'll turn off the lights so they don't have to consume too much power. And so what we started doing was to educate people, to let them know you can actually use the power to make money instead of just turning it to ensure you're not paying a lot for it. And so we realized the sustainability of the mini grid is key. So on one end, you have the situation where, Access just mentioned, a huge burden on the grid. And then on another end, you have a situation where people are just not using the power. They only use it at night, and during the day it's turned off. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a number of areas where REA has intervened in PUEs. One, we have a grant component. It's about $20 million, where we provide grants to the end user. So about 60% of the cost of the equipment is either through the developer or through the end users themselves. So they can actually apply for the grant. For instance, there's a meal that costs $10,000. Our program is willing to give them 60% off that cost to help the market, because we realized that just telling the mini-grid developers to incorporate PU was not enough. We needed to also create a grant scheme that would incentivize these people or these rural dwellers into using this productive use equipment. And again, of course, through this, we're promoting more efficient equipment versus the equipment that, consume a lot of electricity. We also, through the capital project, so program, a department funded by the federal government, we deploy pilot schemes. So we test it out by ourselves. Recently, we deployed irrigation, solar irrigation water pumps. We also deployed mini grids to agro clusters, just to test, to demonstrate that it's possible, and then we direct investors to go in that direction. And we also have another program called the Energizing Agriculture Program. This program is different in that it goes to agro clusters, identify agro clusters, and then connect mini grid developers versus mini grid developers, and then you try to bring the agro into, or the PU into the space. Next slide, please. Okay, so mentioned under the, we call it programmatic budgeting, funded by the government, we had 3 categories that were deployed in 2022. One, high capacity productive use, solar irrigation water pumps, and a low capacity productive use. For the high capacity productive use, we deployed in clusters where they had rice mill, drying machines, tomato drying facilities, and all of those processing equipment already in place. For the solar irrigation water pumps, we deployed into areas where they were not able to do all year round farming, seasonal farming. And then for the low capacity, we actually deployed units that could charge, I would say clippers, some smaller low capacity productive use equipment. And also we trained them on the use of those equipment, telling them what was possible with the units that they got. Next slide. Thank you. Sorry. So this is just a snapshot of the pictures, the irrigation pictures. Next slide. Next. From our experience, there are 3 major areas, right? And I think everyone can kind of fit into those boxes. They are providing debt, providing grant, or providing equity. Of course, you have MES and some other structures that may be a hybrid of both. But we realize that you can't grow this market without grants. You need some sort of grant funding, right? You need to subsidize the cost of the equipment. We had an earlier conversation around how do you convince someone to pay more for an equipment that is more efficient in use of electricity versus, let me say, a fairly used equipment that they purchase that's cheaper, right? A lot of capacity building is going into that area, and as the RA, we're trying to coordinate the space, but again, there's how much we can do and how much we can control. Yes, we have the grant, but we don't have the capital to give to every developer. Like he said, he wants to scale up, but we don't have money to give to all of them, and also on the equity end as well. So basically, there are opportunities in the space, in the country, and for us, what's important are people play in the right space and also can grow the market to the point where it doesn't even need grants to survive. Next slide, I think that's it. Okay, so we've tested out 3 models. One is where some mini-grid developers themselves purchase the equipment. So we visited one of our sites 2 months ago. The mini-grid developer was there, built the mini-grid, and then realized that people were not consuming the electricity. So moved a step further and then purchased rice mills and some other equipment and added the cost to the cost of their electricity. So instead of them paying for electricity on one end and repaying the cost of the rice mill, they just increase the cost of the electricity. Say, as far as you keep consuming, this is your flat rate. You will be able to pay up this rice mill within, let's say, 18 months or within X period of time. So that helped, them understand it properly, because one of the challenges we realize is people in the local communities do not even understand the models except it's broken down to how they can understand. And then the other 2 models talks about the equipment vendor partnering with the mini-grid developer this I do not see a lot of. I see a lot of mini-grid developers trying to do the work of the equipment vendor, which is good. But I know there are a lot of equipment vendors out there, and if they partner together, it would also help the mini-grid developers scale up their mini-grid deployment, while the equipment vendor can also scale up on that end. I think this is the last slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was very insightful and comprehensive. Well done, Rhea. So we heard, I guess, a lot of your work is focused on grants, and we know that grants are limited vis-a-vis the needs across the continent. So we need to explore more commercially oriented financing solutions. Beatrice, can you share some wisdom here from Infraco's experience? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Beatrice. I work for a company called Infraco Africa. So I will probably introduce Infraco Africa, just go to the next slide, as part of a bigger group. So Infraco Africa is part of a bigger group called the Private Infrastructure Development Group, PIDGE. We call it PIDGE in short. Next slide. So PIDGE has several companies under it, and we invest specifically in infrastructure projects, but a few years ago, 2019 to be specific, we included mini-grids and the off-grid sector, generally decentralized renewable energy. Can you hear me? No? No. Okay. Yes. No, the people at the back. No. Now you can hear me. Yes. Right. Okay. So I hope you heard my name, Beatrice. You saw it. Infraco Africa. I work for Infraco Africa, which is part of a bigger group called the Private Infrastructure Development Group, PIDGE. So we have a blended finance group. It's a blended finance group where Infraco Africa provides the equity to infrastructure projects. Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund, EAIF, similar to this conference, that provides debt. And then we have GuarantCo. GuarantCo provides credit enhancement facilities. They try and mobilize the local capital markets. And then finally, we have a PHTA sector that provides technical assistance and VGF grants to projects that we invest in. So I'll specifically speak about Infraco Africa and our involvement in the mini-grid sector, because that's what we are doing now. But apart from mini-grid sector, we generally invest in larger infrastructure projects, water, roads, and that. But today, we'll focus on mini-grids specifically. So Infraco Africa has invested in several mini-grid developers. I will showcase 3, and then I will go specifically for the productive use PUEs. I'll go specifically to 2 of these. So we have invested in PowerGen in Sierra Leone. We have invested in Ariso in their Kudura project in Kenya. And we've also invested in Equatorial Power in DRC and in Rwanda. So in total, we have around 40 million investment in the mini-grid sector and around 40,000 connections under our name. Not specifically us only, but our investee companies. Next slide, please. So I'll go through 2 case studies, and I'm looking at this from an investor's perspective, and the business models that we have seen that have worked, and those that would want to see more of, and those that we think maybe the challenges that we faced when we are financing these projects. So I'll start with Equatorial Power. So Equatorial Power operates in 2 countries, DRC and Rwanda. Both of those countries are difficult countries in the mini-grid sector, so they are sort of innovators in that way. So they have come up, when they brought us the case, they brought us their mini-grids for us to evaluate. We thought they were interesting because they had initiatives to stimulate demand in their mini-grid. So specifically, Equatorial Power does, I like looking at this from 2 different perspectives. As Barbara said, there are those initiatives that the developer actually does so that they can stimulate the demand. So Equatorial Power actually provides its own anchor loads. And then the rest, the other side to look at it is we stimulate demand from the customer's perspective. So you can provide financing for appliances for the customers to increase demand. And that is more predominant in the second case study that I have. So Equatorial Power specifically has agriculture processing hubs. We call them APHs. It creates demand by having ice machines. So for every mini grid that they set up, they have ice making machines that actually consumes between 20 to 30% of the power generated by their mini grids. And in turn, they sell the ice. So to their advantage, they are located in a island which has a lot of fishing. So specifically for that fishing community, they need ice to cool their cool their fish so that it can last long, to freeze their fish. Thank you. So the ice machine really came in handy, not just for themselves, but also for the community around. And from where we sit as Infraco Africa, one of the things that we look at in projects is the impact to the society. So these initiatives generally have very good impact to the society. So they also do water purification. So they went into an island that most people were consuming water directly from the rivers or from the lake, and they set up water purification centers, and that also consumes power for them, and it generally pays back very quickly because then it's their power they're consuming, and they're creating their own demand, and they sell the water to the community at reasonable prices. Cold storage, again, fish drying, sorry, the previous case.
Sorry.
So in terms of operations, before I get to operations, there's a very interesting program that they started, business incubation program. So as Barbara says, you don't teach people not to use power because traditionally they are wired not to use. They will switch off power at 8 p.m. because they don't want high bills. So they started some program that is quite interesting and it would be good to replicate in other mini grids. Business incubation program where they just teach the local community about business. So you see people starting off like small businesses that make them money, and this stimulates demand a bit more. Probably soon they'll have the problem Access is having of like trying to curtail capacity, but that's good. So the last one, e-mobility, it's interesting for us because as Infraco Africa, we also fund e-mobility companies. So what we are trying to work out is how can these two work together, because rural e-mobility is also a challenge to a lot of people. So we think we are trying a pilot. For now, it has not worked 100%, but we are trying a pilot where we bring in a bit of e-mobility vehicles. Mainly it's 3-wheelers and 2-wheelers. Those work perfectly in the rural areas. So if that works, then we can roll it out to the rest of the mini-grid providers. For this specifically, there will be two, the developer of the mini-grid, and then there will be the e-mobility company, because of course we do not expect the mini-grid developers to be experts as well in the e-mobility sector. So in terms of operations, so we see some initiatives that are directly operated by the developers, for instance, what Equatorial Power is doing, and then we see funded and operated. In fact, for all the ones that we have funded, everything, including the initiatives and everything, is funded by the developer. But I don't think that is very sustainable, because then we have to, I think developers need to focus on providing power. So we need more financiers to do the rest of the equipment. In terms of contribution to revenues, which is where we are most interested in, we see that the more the initiatives, this contributes to approximately 30 to 40% of revenue. And now we can go to the second case, which is Kudura Power. For Kudura Power specifically, because we've been looking at these grids for the last couple of years, we find that for those consumers who have appliances in their households, their demand is generally 20% more than those that do not have appliances. So Kudura is a second case study for us. What they have done, very similar to what Equatorial Power has done, is set up clean water purification centers. So for every mini-grid, actually not for every mini-grid, for 3 mini-grids, they have 1 purification center, and they actually bottle the water, so it actually goes to the rest of the country. And then appliance financing, I'll dwell a little bit on this. Appliance financing has several categories. So they have the least in terms of like shaving machine, where you find people working their land in their farms during the day, and then in the evening you find, I had an opportunity to visit this, you find a series of kids sitting outside somebody's house and they're waiting to be shaved. So that generates, even if they're charging as little as $50 or less, then you find it's generating a little bit of the demand is higher and it's generating revenue for these customers. So it comes from as low as shaving machine, and the categories go all the way to milling machines. So these basically is businesses. When we say POEs, we mean equipment that actually brings about businesses and more revenues to the end users. And then there's one interesting one here, street lighting. So they have partnered with county governments. So everywhere they have a mini grid, there are street lights. So you find the villages at night, they're very well lit. So the business is open for longer hours. It's a way of also increasing the demand, and the county governments pay them for the lighting. If they do. Sometimes that is negotiable, but they're supposed to pay. Lastly, I'll talk about telco towers. So we're trying something new with Kudura Power in Turkana. Turkana is north of Kenya. They are partnering with telecom towers like Safaricom, MTN. So for those rural places, most of the telco towers use diesel generators. So if actually the mini grid is very close to a telco tower, then it makes sense even for the telco tower to get power from this mini grid. And this really increases the demand. In fact, the telco towers, when you look at the business model, eventually will become like the anchor load to that mini grid. In terms of operations, nothing new really. Revenue contribution, which is where we look at, increases 20 to 30% when you have this initiative versus when you do not have this initiative. Kudura has had the opportunity to work with Acument, provide grants for these particular initiatives, and they're looking for more partners to provide funding for these initiatives. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. That was brilliant. Very exciting to see what you guys are doing. So before I open up the floor, just have a last round of questions. This one is for the operators, or the gents. You've heard the ladies, they have the money, right? So this is the new world order, right? So what is your ask to the public sector, to the financiers, that could help you sort of really do more as far as productive use appliances and obviously more mini grid deployment? So maybe you could start at the far end.
So, thank you for that question. I already said fragmented ecosystem. And I think in Nigeria's case, it's a matter of the actors outside the mini-grid space understanding what we're doing better. It is a nascent sector. Like I said, most of those of us operating in Nigeria now are less than, 5 years old. Most commercially viable mini-grids. It is just for more actors, even the equipment suppliers, the MFIs, they don't understand as much yet. So it is a lot of engagement. While we understand the customers and the areas and can engage well there, we now need to find a way to take that engagement to create a much larger ecosystem, and then maybe you can then finance, instead of financing the customers who are informal, you can then finance just one person, maybe us, who is more formal, you can deal with, can provide you all, can meet all the criteria you need for that financing to go through, and then we deal with the customers. At Husk, we already do appliance sales and financing for the customers, from everything from phones to TVs to freezers. Even water as a service as well. So if we have understood how that works, and then the ecosystem around us is yet to understand, but can help us get to where we need to get to, then it is a question of more engagement, more interaction. But I think over time that will happen. We've seen the case in India, and I think Nigeria will follow soon, and then the rest of Africa would follow as well.
Thank you. Ibrahim?
Thank you. I think we would love to really invite Infraco to Bamako to. We have a mini grid association of mini grid operators, so she could come there and have a. Yeah, so.
Beatrice, is that a yes? Perfect. We got a deal.
So because I think that's very interesting. We see, I think power is economy. Power is really a business. And what you mentioned, what is amazing in the community is, if you have before electrification of the community and after electrification of the community, is two communities which are different completely. Yeah. So because each community in Africa have a huge potential and have huge business opportunity. As soon as you put the power, then you start to be catalyzed. But what is really we are lacking at mini grid, I think there's a good thing that our government in different African countries put a policy and agency for electrification. Mali, we have Amader, Nigeria, and Senegal, and all the African countries have today an agency for electrification. But I think the challenge now is our ecosystems. So how to really finance productive users, how to really finance the mini grid operators, how to really find a way to solve the questions of the tariff. And so this dynamic, I think having a kind of partners, that's my question to you, Beatrice, is in the country you mentioned, how is it really you are dealing with a kind of those elements there? For example, when you are, you have a productive use, you stimulate, then the end user, the households, will they have enough power to them? Do you have a kind of quota that how much will, because that is really kind of challenge, providing electricity to the client households, and also stimulate, the economy. In some of our case, for example, we have one village, Bangumana, we have only 30 kilowatts solar, and we have 4 bakery in Bangumana. Each of the bakery is 20 kilowatts, and we cannot connect any of them, and they are not happy, and because single bakery take a power from, and then we have also big health center because there are malaria research centers there, and they need almost 30 kilowatts, so they can take all our power, but which is also good for us. Of course, if you have only one single, then you are sure that they pay you your money, but then the government give you the permit to also provide electricity to the end users, which are the household, and so this kind of challenge, if we have a partner like Infraco, when equity partner or debt partner, long terms, this can really solve.
Ibrahim, thank you. Open for business. Financiers, please. Right, ladies, very quickly, what is your ask to operators so you can deploy more capital?
What I would say, maybe directly to Ibrahim, is for us, it just looks at the business model. Most of the time, we actually ask that the of companies or partners that they do a 20-year business model, and we want to see incremental growth in capacity of the mini grids as the demand grows. So we have actually most of the power needs to go to households for us because impact is important. But as well, we want to see how has the business been modeled on paper. So what I would ask of the developers is actually proper business modeling, a model that looks at the future, because then we're not just providing power for today. We expect the growth, as you have seen in your mini grids, and we want to see that on paper so that when we are funding, we know we'll provide 2 million this year, but then in another 3-4 years, we need to add on the capacity of the mini grids, and that has to be provisioned for in the business models.
Thank you. Barbara?
Can you hear me? Okay. I think the first thing I would say is developers need to carry out the proper DD, right? If you're plan is to have a sustainable mini-grid. You can't build it. You can't just consider households alone. That's the truth. So when you install a mini-grid in a rural community where they've just started using electricity bulbs, I understand that the plan is that they would scale up and start using microwaves, we hope. But you need to think of a more sustainable model from the start, which is, how do I ensure that this mini-grid is sustainable and I can change my batteries in 5 to 7 years? What would be my scale-up plan, right? So Accents mentioned how they started with, people were not using electricity, and now they have a crisis because more people are interested in, using electricity for other productive use. So you must have a plan, right? Not just for today, but for the future. Also, I think sustainability is key, and I hope investors will look at more sustainable models versus quick turnaround around paying back a loan, right? We give a grant, the government gives grant per connection, and so a lot of times the investors' drive to investing in a business is more the grant. So yes, we'll get the grant in 6 months and we can pay back the facility, versus how can we make this business sustainable? So if the ask is more a sustainable model, then people start thinking around, like Beatrice mentioned, this mini-grid, the demand, at least 30% of the demand is mopped up by some PUA equipment that has already been thought of at the inception stage of the business versus an afterthought. Then you won't have a lot of stranded mini-grids in different locations. Something else I was going to say is creativity, right? Everyone can be doing the same thing and expect a different result. What can I do differently from what everyone is currently doing now? How can I stimulate the market, right? If you need trainings or capacity building in local communities where they are currently not using any form of appliance, then you can ask, because those are available. But the thing is, no one is asking the right questions. As government, we can't fix everything. So I had a program that seeks to bring financing to the developers, so connect developers with investors. And sometimes the kind of business plans we see, we can't even take it to the investors. We just keep it and just tell them stories, right? Because it's not sustainable. So I think the developers need to do a bit more, in that area. But also to investors is, you can't offer them commercial rates for rural development. It's not feasible. We need more impact funds to come and partner with the developers. We need more patient capital. A lot of the capital you see out there is around 2 to 3 years, and that's just unrealistic. But if you have a longer payback period, it would ease out the burden on the investment and allow it grow organically versus making it 100% dependent on some grant that may not even come, or grants that will come for year one, and before you know it, the grant is exhausted. So I think there's a lot of work everyone can do, and we're all responsible for growing the space. And as government, we'll run pilot schemes, but everyone has a role to play. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we have just under 10 minutes for the end of the panel. I'd like to open the floor. Perhaps we could start with some operators or developers. Do we have any in the audience? Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Ayo Hademilua. I'm the president for Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria. I'm also the CEO and founder of A4T. We develop mini grids in Nigeria. Ibrahim, thanks for speaking the heartbeat of developers. I mean, when you see a true developer, they don't need to look into books before they share their story. So my question is, what's the tariff regime like in Mali? What's the framework around the tariff in Mali? Because we'll be thinking about coming to invest, huh?
Thank you, Aliero. So, okay, the tariff in Mali is, we have a different tariff. Of course, we have a national utility tariff, which is a national tariff set by the government, and which today is about 20 cents. Of course, it varied because depending on the different regime, first 50 kilowatt hours, social tariffs, and but The lowest is for the households, and is a uniform tariff all over Mali by those connected to the national grid. Then you have the mini grid tariff, which is regulated by the agency. We have the CO is here, Mr. Siribe. That tariff depends from area to area to project. It go anything from 30 cents to almost 55 cents. But, yes, but. Today, the but is today that, of course, many communities say, we are so poor, how can we pay more than the utilities? Then we have a challenge when the government get a project, subsidize some project in your area, it's a solar hybridized, then the government would like to see the tariff low, And then if we have 5 mini-grid developers here, he get a government project, they added some hybrid, solar, then his tariff is 25 or 30, then I have make my own investment in 1 mini-grid, my tariff is 45, then of course my community will start to make a pressure. Why we want to be like the others, yeah. And of course we understand them, because, they who want to pay more. So it's quite a kind of challenge today about the tariff. Of course we are asking we have also association, is the association of the mini grid operators. We would like the government to really come with, there are 2 options, only 2. Or the government subsidize all the tariff, or to call it, they don't like subsidize in Mali. They say it's compensation because national utility is losing money. So Malian administration call it compensation, but I think compensation subsidy can be discussed. But we would like the government then to compensate all the operators in the country, so we have all the same tariff, then there are no discussion. Or it will be free tariff, based on my business model. I come to negotiate with my regulator, which is Amade, to make a case that this is a viable tariff for my business. And then we fix the tariff. We are not there yet, but I think the discussion is ongoing. Today there are different tariff in Mali, which go from the simple to double. Yeah, starting the lowest is I think 145 CFA, which is around 30 cents, to 375, which is about 60 cents. Yes.
Thank you. Tariffs topic. Okay, so the lady here at the front, please introduce yourself very quickly.
Hello, my name is Enam Iya. I'm from the IREC Standard Foundation. I think this is really exciting, listening to all your stories, but I just wonder, do you use IoT, digital, in any of your tools as part of your toolkit, so that it helps you focus better? And to the funders, do you really understand the context of Africa? Because I think that this is a critical thing. We tend to look at Europe, we look at America, and we import en masse the solutions or the economic frameworks that they have deployed. But we need to remember that really in terms of development, we are perhaps 300 years behind. So we need to go back to that time and create solutions that really understand our people and our context. And I think that's what's missing. So maybe our answer would be nice.
Thank you. I think we'll have to continue during the happy hour, because this is it's getting heated. We'll have 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll ask the panel to very quickly wrap up. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kjetil Røyne from TIF Community Power. We are operating more than 100 health facilities in Malawi and also expanding. The question is kind of technical and in line with the previous one. How do you, how are your operating principles, and how do you in a way prioritize if the demand is higher than the supply.
Okay, last question. Oh, okay, 2 more questions. That's it.
Yes, well, good afternoon. My name is Maria. I work for AVSI Foundation, which is a non-profit. Mine is not really a question, but I can see that in the discussion you never mentioned a non-profit, which is kind of understandable. But I wish you could look also at all actors present. You talked about ecosystem. The ecosystem is wide. And at times we do have solutions that could be helpful. And we can also attract grants that you cannot necessarily access. So mine is more of an invitation to you to look a little bit broad, because every one of us has identity and expertise, and I think we can work better together if we stay to that identity. Thanks.
I think the developers can talk a little bit about non-profits.
Yeah.
Hang on a second, just very last question.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Enoch Yeboejapom, and I'm director of the Renewable Energy Association of Ghana, and a member of the steering committee for the People's Green Energy. So tagging along slightly to understanding Africa, I had one on capacity and skilled workforce. Usually, different projects think that it's so difficult to find very skilled workforce in Africa, as it were, and so many times you have other people coming in to sort of do these developments. I think there's a good opportunity for you to elaborate on it and speak to it a bit more so that we know whether we do have the skilled workforce or not, and that would also help influence. And then also the issue of disruptive technologies. Do you think hydrogen is one of the key things that would also be shaking up, you know, the industry a bit more in the mini-grid sector? And finally, government-led versus private sector-led. Ghana is pretty new in the mini-grid sector, and it looks like government wants to be the one leading it a lot more. But I'll be happy to hear from you what you think and what your experiences have been. Thank you.
Thank you. And one important point on skills, because it's one of the biggest constraints in the power sector across the board, from utility scale to off-grid, is after finance is skills. So very quick reactions. I think there's some big questions here. I don't think we'll answer them today, but...
How do you want us to split them? There are a few questions.
You choose.
So I will help Barbara with the non-profit question. RMI, which is a non-profit, is actually involved with the Energizing Agriculture program in Nigeria. So there is a lot of room for non-profits actors, you know, because like you said, there are a lot of things you can do that we can do. I think I also had a question of IoT. At HOSC, we have our own proprietary in-house IoT, developed, run, managed by ourselves. It's not used by anyone else. We pride ourselves as the mini-grid company with the lowest LCOE across, you know, the world. And that is because we've understood quite a few things to do. The approach we take is slightly or more than likely a lot more different than most. And being able to smartly run these grids is very, very important because it helps with your operational costs. And then I think I also heard about the question of not transporting what is from the developer to where we are. That's a very great point. And this business is entirely driven on socioeconomic behavior. I'll give you an example. Nigerians here will know 300 plus tribes, 200 plus languages. How do you even start? There is no one community that is the same. So you have to understand essentially what works for each community. A fishing community does not need a welding machine, for instance. Maybe there might be a latent opportunity there, but you have to find it. An agrarian community farming cassava does not need a rice mill. You can't take that there. Because how would they grow rice? Rice grows differently, right? So those are things, and I heard Barbara say DD, I think she meant understanding, and two things that make Oma a great mini-grid, aside from the finance, the equipment, the IoT, is the social part. The site selection, we figured that out. We are very pragmatic with that. And the stakeholder engagement, top down, bottom up. If you miss those two things, no matter what you do, the mini-grid will fail. and it will fail and be stranded asset, like Barbara also mentioned. I'll stop there, and maybe my panelists can take the other question.
Thank you, Olu. I'll take two questions. The African context. I personally believe that mini-grid is a very local solution for starts. This is a solution for the local that should be done by the locals. So I think the local context is very critical in building these mini-grids. You have to understand, and what we emphasize on as we evaluate some of these mini-grids is how, in terms of the workforce, where are you getting your workforce? Because especially in terms of getting customers to sign on to the mini-grid, you need somebody who speaks the language of the customer. You need for them to lodge complaints. Most of these people do not understand English or speak English or French. They speak local language. That's why I say mini-grid is a very local solution that should be done by local people. And we find that most mini-grids that actually prosper are those that actually, but one of the things we actually request our developers is they have to have local presence. There has to be a local person as a customer support person on the ground in the mini-grids. And we find that very constructive, and complaints and everything that is handled from the ground up, because it's more efficient that way. Maybe second way we can handle that is data. A lot of our mini-grids, as we said, it's a new space. So we're collecting data. We are seeing trends. We are seeing both social, economic, and all-round trends. So that will enable us. It's you who said IoT as well. That will feed into that. So eventually we'll have solutions that are very capable of predicting demand, predicting generation, like predicting the social behavior. So that can only be driven by data. And I think that is very critical for the mini-grid developers that are here. We need to generate data, and we need to make it accessible to people out there. And then maybe lastly, I'll take your question on, is it government-led or developer, private-led? I'll say it's more private for now. However, the government have a very heavy hand on it, because then regulation, policy, all that comes from the government. The funding and the developers are most 90% private. However, the government has a lot of influence in the sector, from the regulation side, from the tariff approval side, from that end. However, as investors, we are seeing more and more private-led initiatives. So I would say it's more private-led. But for instance, in Kenya, the rural agency in Kenya has actually been mandated to develop mini-grids. Whether they will do it directly or they will do that via private sector, we're not sure how they will go about it. But that's one of the ways I've seen the government play in a big way in terms of developing the mini-grids. But it's more private-led. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will maybe get to the point mentioned by two persons about new technology, digitals, and also about the government aspect. I think, in my view, which is linked to the tariff as well. In my view, one of the main issue we are facing today, is that, especially in Africa, or in the world in general, is about the power sectors. Because power anywhere in the world, the power sector is politic. Power is politics. It's not, and because the one who controls the power controls the economy. And so when the Ghanaian friend says that Ghana, the government want to lead the electrification, I think any government in the world want to really control the power. And that is the industrialized world, that is a developing world. Because energy is really politics. And so the choice, the energy solution choice is a political choice. And but one of the things is, for that political decision and so on, is that in our world today, we want to fix the power solution of our world, which come from the 20th century or 19th century, when we really see the big connection between countries, between towns, and so on. All this development I remember from my engineering schools. And then we want to apply this in 21st century. And then this become huge lobby, and they don't want to change. While the technology is not there anymore. You know, technology is going somewhere else, but our way of designing our power by the planner, by the in a ministry and so on, interconnection between countries, and all those things are from the 20th century. And it is outdated today. That's a situation. And, but this is going anyway. You know, we are going to have a battery. We are going to have this room battery in the coming year, which will power, you know, which will be maybe about 100 megawatt hours will be put in this room in coming very soon, you know. Then it will be different. So you can power all this area from, you know, airport and so on, from just a kind of size like this. It's coming now. So it means why we have to put billion to make all these big connections. But that discussion is not the topic of this discussion. So therefore, I believe that really that renewable energy,
seconds.
Yeah, renewable energy and digitalization will really make a change and push. I believe on that, and I think I'm also very happy that African Development Bank is really on that path. We need also them to really make this understand by the African decision makers. And because that is extremely important in my view, then the other aspect is the private sectors. The private sectors, anywhere in the world, is a driver of the power sectors. And because the government is to enabling environment. There is not countries that the government can finance power supply. And how our government can enabling environment, and how the private sectors can be the actors of supplying energy and using the best technology, which is renewable energy. I think this is what we see, the beauty of rural electrification agencies that is really happening today in all the different parts.
Thank you very much. Barbara, I think they've answered all the hard questions, huh?
Yeah, just a few.
Okay.
Sorry. So just
very
a
quick,
few
please.
points. Not for profit, yes, we're open and we could discuss. So REA, we don't admit that we know everything, so we're always willing to partner, and we encourage all those partnerships. Public sector versus private sector, both parties have a role to play. Government, we moved in Nigeria from government-owned public asset or power assets to where we had the privatization, and now we're even giving grants to developers like F1T and the others to come into the space. So there's a role for government to play, right? Private sector won't give themselves grants. That's what the government can do. Regulations will come from the government, enabling environments come from the government. However, for sustainability, innovation, and also for just growth of the market and the workforce, we need the private sector to drive that. So I would say they both have a major role to play, and I think there's space for everyone, really. Thank you.
There's space for everyone. Power to the people. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience, and I'll see you in the next session. And a round of applause to these fantastic panelists. Thank you. What a great panel, you guys, huh? I know. I just thank you so much.
Time is already approaching.